Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. I appreciate you being with me. We are in the midst of sharing a few thoughts with you about the doctrine of Gog and Magog. Ezekiel 38 and 39 are some of the most interesting, fascinating, and difficult prophecies or words in the entire Old Testament. What's interesting to me is how people can very often base an entire theology almost on some of the most difficult words in the Bible. Well, be that as it may, I've been sharing some thoughts with you. You know, Gog and Magog, it's described as the war. Especially in Revelation chapter 20, we find these words. Revelation 20 and verse 8, that the Satan would be loosed, and then verse 8, shall go out to deceive the nations which are in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle, the number of whom is the sand of the sea. Well, the trouble with that translation is that it's literally to the war. This reference to the war is really quite a common theme throughout both Old Testament and New. For instance, Isaiah chapters 2 through 4, which predicted the last days and the day of the Lord, likewise predicted the war. Isaiah 3:23, and that the war in the last days, the day of the Lord, would be when the men of Israel would fall by the edge of the sword. Jesus quotes that verse, cites it, in Luke 21, verse 24, in a passage that 99.9% of all commentators apply to AD 70. What's also fascinating is that the Battle of Gog and Magog, being called the war, most commentators tragically overlook the fact of the direct comparisons between Revelation chapter 20 verse 8 and the war of Revelation chapter 16 and the Battle of Armageddon. Notice back in Revelation chapter 16, of course, John is writing, he's talking about the gathering, and he says these evil spirits, they are the spirits of devils working miracles, which go forth unto the kings of the earth and of the whole world, and gather them to the battle of that great, and this is literally the war, again, just like Revelation 20 and verse 8, the war. Now I want you to notice in Revelation 16, Revelation chapter 20, both passages you have the gathering for the battle, the gathering for all of the nations of the earth, and in both passages we have reference to the war. And what's interesting about this is that in both passages, if we're attuned to it, this battle is the time of the avenging of the martyrs. This Revelation chapter 16, the war, the Battle of Armageddon, oh, by the way, which is simply a gathering for the war never takes place because the great day of the Lord comes instead. But in Revelation chapter 16, the great day of the Lord is the judgment on Babylon to avenge the blood of the martyrs that Babylon had shed. Revelation chapter 16, 6 and following. Which takes us back to the great day of the Lord of Revelation chapter 6, 12 and following, which would be in fulfillment of Isaiah chapters 2 through 4. The last days, the war at the day of the Lord. So, notice the progression. Isaiah 2 through 4 predicted the day of the Lord at the time of the war in the last days, when the blood of the martyrs would be avenged. Isaiah chapter 4 verse 4. Revelation chapter 6 predicted the war at the great and terrible day of the Lord, when the martyrs would be avenged, and cites specifically Isaiah chapters 2 through 4. Revelation chapter 16 talks about the war of the last days, the great and terrible day of the Lord, when the martyrs would be avenged. Revelation chapter 20 talks about the battle of Gog and Magog, i.e. the war, when the martyrs of God would be avenged. So we have a perfect chain of evidence here concerning the war. Now watch this. Jesus in Luke 23, 28 to 31, was being led out to his death. The women of Jerusalem who loved him were weeping and mourning, and Jesus turns to them and says, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For the time is coming in which men will run to the hills and cry to the rocks, 'Fall on us.'" He's citing directly Isaiah chapter 2, 9 to 11, 19 through 21. The day of the Lord in the war, which remember, Jesus himself applied to AD 70. Now here's what's interesting. In Luke 23, virtually all commentaries agree that Jesus was referring to the impending coming fall of Jerusalem. One thing is clear, he was talking about a judgment of Jerusalem to avenge his death. But what does that mean? We have Isaiah predicting the last days, the day of the Lord, and the war, the time of the avenging of the martyrs. Jesus applied Isaiah to AD 70, but Revelation 6 is quoting from Isaiah, which Jesus applied to AD 70. Revelation 16 is the same as Revelation 6, which Jesus applies to AD 70. Now, unless a person can definitively prove that the war, the battle of Gog and Magog, the war, if you please, to avenge the blood of the martyrs of Revelation chapter 20 at the end of the millennium, unless a person can prove that this is a totally different war, the war, from Revelation 16, from Revelation 6, from Isaiah chapter 2, which Jesus himself applied to AD 70. Guess what? Unless you can definitively prove that delineation and that distinction, then that proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that the battle of Gog and Magog, the war of Revelation 20, has to be kept within the first century framework. That's pretty powerful stuff. Hey, thanks so much for joining me. By the way, Gary DeMar, while I don't agree with everything that he has to say about Gog and Magog, nonetheless has a very intriguing discussion of Gog and Magog in his book, The Last Days Madness, Obsession of the Modern Church. This is the revised version. I offer this on my website. And as always, if you want to order a copy of this, go to my website, www.eschatology.org or www.bibleprophecy.com. Order a book, mention that you saw it on YouTube, the offer on YouTube, and I will refund your shipping. And also, don't forget, I have this book that I've written personally, The Last Days Identified. Remember Gog and Magog for the last days, okay? As always, mention, when you order the book, mention that you saw the offer on YouTube. I will refund your shipping. So again, thanks for joining me for today's morning musings. We'll see you on the flip side.